Hello world, Molweni Lizwe. Now, welcome to the world of biographies. And on this side of the internet, we discuss and we get to know, we learn about African heroes, legends, experts in sports, actors, musicians, scholars, and sportsmen. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Now let's get to know today's legend. All right. So as you know, in this week's series or this month's series, we're talking about politicians. And I'm talking about Sobukwe. Now, Robert Sobukwe. He was a well-known figure in South Africa. He was held in isolation for 6 years. And he was morally upright. We're going to talk about how his wife was, alone with the kids after he got arrested. A lot of these politicians, to be honest, that served Robben Island, they left their families and their wives ended up being the husband and ended up being the wife, taking care of everything because the men were locked up and they couldn't do anything. And Robert Sobukwe was no different. He was very respected by the people because he was morally upright, His funeral was so big. He was so honored, by the people around him. His wife, we're going to get to that, but his wife said, the love affair was love at first sight. We're going to talk about that and how his son, got to know who his dad was. Like for the first time he met, and he was surprised that was his dad because he left, the children when they were very young. I think he left the mama when he was pregnant. And he had a love for gardening. He was an ordinary human being, but he was a scholar. He worked at VETS, and I work right next to VETS. So that's very, very interesting that he was an assistant lecturer. At that time, black people were not allowed to be the main lecturers. They were just assigned to be assistant lecturers because of their skin color. But we're going to talk more about that. So, Robert Sobukwe. Sobukwe was born in Graaff-Reinet in the Eastern Cape. My dad used to work there. Province, in the Eastern Cape province. So if you're in South Africa, you know the Eastern Cape province. And if you're not, predominantly the Xhosa people will stay in the Eastern Cape. Not only them, but majority, it is the Xhosa people. And funny enough, I'm doing a lot of Xhosa men's biographies. But we're going to get to Jacob Zuma, and he's Zulu, so we're going to get to him as well. He was born on the 5th of December, 1924. That was a long time ago. Robert Sobukwe was the youngest child. He had 5 siblings, which consisted of 4 brothers and 1 sister. While his father, who was from Lesotho, worked as a general store clerk and part-time woodcutter, Sobukwe's Xhosa mother served as a domestic worker in white homes. Robert's earliest education was a mission school in Graaff-Reinet, located in South Africa. At age 15, Sobukwe continued and eventually completed his secondary education at the Held Town Institute, which provided a Methodist, Christian, and liberal arts education to all students. When he finished his education there, he enrolled for a primary teacher's training course for 2 years. However, he didn't receive a teaching post. Later on, Robert's education went on a pause in 1943 when he suffered from TB, tuberculosis. And the TB during that time, it was very hard to cure it. Many people died from a TB. But now, you can cure it, a TB, but if you don't take care of it, you could actually pass from it. So he was in Forte. Forte is a university in the Eastern Cape. So he was at Forte from 1947 to 1949. In 1947, Sobukwe enrolled at the South African Native College at Forte, the premier undergraduate institution for black students of his time. Sobukwe registered for a BA at Forte, majoring in English, Xhosa, and Native Administration. Although Sobukwe was initially not interested in politics, his study of Native Administration relating to the administration of South Africa's Bantu stands, combined with his exposure to politics at Fort Hare, made Sobukwe keener to the topic. Was it keener? Okay, made Sobukwe keener to the topic. Later on, he became more focused on poetry and drama. Ooh, he loved drama. Oh gosh. former drama students here. His focus on politics was driven by the influence of his lecturer, Cecil Ntloko. He was a follower of all the African conventions. AAC Sobukwe and his three friends started a daily publication called Beware. The publication had collaboration and critique of native representative councils and native advisory boards. He joined the African National Congress Youth League. In 1948, the organization had been established on the university campus by Godfrey Pinche, or Piche, I think that's an Afrikaans name, Pinche, who later became its president. In 1949, Sobukwe was elected as the first president of the Forte Students Representative Council, where he provided himself to be a distinguished orator. In 1949, Sobukwe met Veronica Mate in Alice Hospital. The couple later got married in 1950. So she said, for her it was love at first sight. So I'm guessing she's the one that fell in love with him first. And she said, oh my God, her heart skipped a bit. So she was training as a nurse at Victoria Hospital, and she used to write him, to tell him to meet her because her train used to pass, by where, he was residing at the time. So they used to meet, and he used to write letters. Guys, I don't know, I find that romantic, but, I guess maybe in the future when we are not using SMSs anymore, kids will look back and be like, oh my God, they message each other on the phone. That's so romantic. Because I find letters very endearing, and my dad used to write me letters, so I don't know, I just find that quite romantic. He was a very family man. He was family oriented, and he loved his family, he loved his children. And so sad what happened to him. But I like how his wife spoke about him. She was so revered by her, so I like that. Mainstream politics. In 1950, Sobukwe was appointed as a teacher at a high school in Standerton, a position he lost when he spoke out in favor of the Defiance campaign in 1952. He was, however, later reinstated. In 1952, Sobukwe achieved notoriety backing the Defiance campaign. During this period, he was not directly involved with mainstream ANC activities, but still had the position of secretary of the organization's branch in Standerton. In 1954, after moving to Johannesburg, Sobukwe became a lecturer of African Studies at the University of Witwatersrand, Wits, basically. During his time in Johannesburg, he became editor of the Africanist newspaper and soon began to criticize the ANC for allowing itself to be dominated by sympathizers of the Progressive Party, which he termed liberal, left, multi-racialist. He stood for an Africanist socialist democracy, was an ardent supporter of Africanist views about liberation in South Africa, and rejected the idea of working with whites. People were speaking so highly of him when he was at VETS. People used to say that he used to go and have a conversation with the gardeners, with the cleaners, like he could relate to the people. As much as he was like formally educated or he was a scholar, he never really sat with his peers. He was a man of every people. He was not a classist. So I really love that. I feel like that's how you keep grounds with everyone. That's how you know about what's going on, because you can be so unaware. So rich, you live up there. I'm not saying that he was rich, but you can be like living with your class and be so unaware of what's going on, with other people, And I find that very humbling. But also, I think because his mama was a domestic worker, you kind of have that attachment or that, that sentiment towards those people. So I like that. And also the fact that he was an assistant lecturer, I feel like that's so racist. He was so racist. He used to garden and handsome and look so handsome with his khaki pants. He was so chivalrous. I find that because he used to garden as well, maybe that's why he conversated a lot with gardeners, because it's kind of like at home I garden as well. Oh man. Anyways, love this man. Pan-Africanism Congress. Formation of the ideology. Sobukwe was a strong believer in the Africanist future for South Africa and rejected any model suggesting working with anyone other than Africans. Defining African as anyone who lives in and pays his allegiance to Africa and who is prepared to subject himself to African majority rule. He grew discontented with the progress of the liberation struggle during the 1950s, in which the apartheid government continually introduced new means to suppress the liberation struggle. Resonating with many members of the ANC, Sobukwe had become impatient with the ANC's inability to achieve results. Sobukwe, an anti-communist, also rejected the ANC's alliance with the South African Communist Party. He later left the ANC to form the Pan-African Congress, PAC, and was elected the first president in 1959. Sobukwe became known as the professor or simply Prof to his close comrades and followers, a statement to his educational achievement and powers of speech and persuasion. He spoke of the need for black South Africans to liberate themselves without the help of non-Africans. Sobukwe defined non-Africans as anyone who lives in Africa or abroad Africa and who does not pay his allegiance. I think that's it. I'm sorry if I pronounced this word wrong. Allegiance to Africa, and who is not prepared to subject himself to African majority rule. His strong convictions and active resistance inspired many other individuals and organizations involved in the anti-apartheid movement, notably the Black Consciousness Movement. Sobukwe argued that whites should be excluded from the ANC, as it was impossible to have a relationship between blacks and whites until further progress had been made. That makes sense. He argued that a reliance on whites would disempower the realization that many of these Africans had, and they had the power to overtake a society that had been taken from them. Sobukwe rejected collaboration with sympathetic whites, as he considered such multiracial cooperation between slave owner and slave as an ungodly alliance before equality was attained. I agree. Anti-Pass campaign of 1960. On March 21, 1960, the APAC led a nationwide protest against the pass laws, which required black people to carry a passbook at all times. Sobukwe led a march to a local police station at Orlando, Soweto, in order to openly defy the laws. He was joined en route by a few followers, and after presenting his pass to a police officer, he purposely made himself guilty under the terms of the pass law of being present in a region or area other than the allowed as per his papers. In a similar protest on the same day in Sharpeville, police opened fire on a crowd of PAC supporters, killing 69 in the Sharpeville massacre. Oh, I remember Sharpeville massacre. We did a short play about the Sharpeville massacre. That deserves a movie, if not a series. In the aftermath, Sobukwe was taken without fair trial, and both the ANC and PAC were banned. Other organizations such as Steve Biko's Black Consciousness were inspired by the actions of Sobukwe. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about him imprisoning or having to be imprisoned on purpose. Because he served such a long time. Like being isolated for 6 years. I feel like that really messed him up psychologically. I don't know if that was a right call, but it made him known. Made him a hero, but I feel like at what cost? It sacrificed him a lot. Anyways, initial imprisonment. Following Sobukwe's arrest after the Sharpeville massacre, he was charged with and convicted of incitement and sentenced to 3 years in prison. He served 1 year of his sentence in Witbank prison, 1960-1961, followed by 2 years in Pretoria. On October 4th, 1961, Robert Sobukwe wrote a letter to Benjamin Pordrand, explaining to him that he could write and receive one letter per week and have one visitor per week. With this type of permission, with his imprisonment in Pretoria gaol, Robert was able to write regularly to people and see his wife frequently. In a later letter by Robert to Veronica on June 19th, I think 1962, he found out that his wife came to visit him but was turned away due to a visiting error. Robert had no visitors that month, and because of that, he wouldn't accept any visitor unless they were accompanied by his wife, or his wife had informed him of who they were and given him warning. Oh, sweetie pie. Robben Island. At the end of Sobukwe's 3-year sentence approached, the National Party Parliament passed the General Law Amendment Act, which introduced a clause allowing for political dissidents to be indefinitely detained. This allowed Sobukwe's sentence to be renewed for an additional 6 years. This is what I hate. He spent on Robben Island. The clause became known as the Sobukwe Clause, as no other individual was sentenced under this provision. At Robben Island, Sobukwe was in company of other revolutionaries in liberation struggles such as Nelson Mandela, Johnson Mlambo, and John Nyati Bokela, among many others. Sobukwe was kept in solitary confinement but enjoyed a unique prisoner plus status. He was permitted certain privileges, including books, magazines, newspaper, civilian clothing. He lived in a separate area on the island and was strictly prohibited from contact with other prisoners. Though Sobukwe was able to communicate sporadically through visual signals while outstanding for exercise, he studied during this time and received, among others, a degree in economics from the University of London. It is speculated that Sobukwe was subjected to this special treatment because the South African government had profiled him as a greater troublemaker than the regular ANC prisoners. Sobukwe's son disputes terming this treatment as special. I mean, he was still in prison. I can agree with his son. Throughout his imprisonment, Sobukwe maintained communication with his friend Benjamin Potrude, who later became his biographer, and he loved Sobukwe. Oh, he loved Sobukwe. I mean, he wrote a book about him, and he was going around speaking about how special he was, what type of friend he was. Oh, what a friend. House arrest. So he struggled to speak during this time because he was isolated, and for a very, very long time. Imagine not speaking to anyone and being isolated for 6 years. I mean, that would rob a man of his logic or his sound mind. That's very wrong. That's very, 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 very wrong. But whatever. House arrest. As authorities recognized Sobukwe's deteriorating physical and mental health, he was released from Robben Island. In 1969, Sobukwe was allowed to live in Kimberley with his family but remained under house arrest. Kimberley was suggested as an area where he could not easily foster subversive activities, and also a place where he could live and work while being easily monitored by the state. He was also restricted through a banning order which disallowed political activities. Various restrictions barred Sobukwe from traveling overseas, thus curtailing his attempts to further his education. For this same reason, he had to turn down several positions as a teacher at various locations in the United States. Sobukwe completed his law degree with the help of local lawyer in Galeshiwe, and he then started his own practice in 1975 in Kimberley. When his son, met him, I only knew when I only knew him when I had to visit him. I didn't know I had a father. He didn't know he had a father. You know what? I get mad or discouraged every time I speak about the apartheid era, how cruel it was. I just, never mind. Illness and death. In early 1977, Sobukwe fell ill and applied for permission to receive medical treatment. His request was denied indefinitely until the intervention of his friend Benjamin Potrude. Subsequently, in September 1977, Sobukwe traveled to Johannesburg, where he was diagnosed with lung cancer and then transferred to the hospital in Cape Town. Although the South African government granted Sobukwe access to treatment, they imposed strict conditions on his travel. Sobukwe was required to report to police stations every time he left Kimberley or arrived at the hospital. He died from complications of lung cancer on 27 February 1978 and was buried in Graaf Reinet on 11 March 1978. I mean, people, spoke so well in his funeral. People were saying if he saw a lady crossing by the streets carrying plastic and the sack of potatoes, he would just put the sack of potatoes over his shoulders and carry the plastic and walk the lady like across the street. Or maybe it was an old woman, it didn't matter. Like, he was very chivalrous, was very helpful towards the people of the community. And apartheid broke him down. His legacy is very, very good, very great. Sobukwe had become a key historical figure in the black liberation struggle of South Africa. Robert was passionate about the freedom of Africa. He was nicknamed the Prof because he believed that education was the ultimate weapon with which black Africans could free themselves from mental and physical modern-day oppression. His vision of a society dedicated to individual rights, irrespective of race or ethnicity, he shared by many of his contemporaries, such as the elements of the ANC and the Pan-Africanism. In Sobukwe's 1959 PAC inaugural speech, he shared a sentiment that continued to be quoted by anti-racism rhetoric and popular media, as he stated, there is only one race to which we all belong, and that is the human race. In our vocabulary, therefore, the word race is applied to man, has no plural form. No. Following Sobukwe's imprisonment at the official South African banning of the anti-apartheid parties in 1960, the influence of the Pan-African Congress steadily waned and was eventually overshadowed again by the African National Congress. The PAC, along with many other anti-apartheid organizations, were forced to move underground operations under the leadership of Potlako Lebalo. The PAC came to sponsor and create a parliamentary wing, Poko. Lebalo's revolutionary rhetoric inspired the planning of violent operations, ultimately leading to the public arrest of 3,246 PAC and POCO members. Rhodes University celebrated Sobukwe's life and renamed a male residence after his name. Oh, he deserves a street as well. This was a tribute to him to show the youth that his life and love for education will never leave his educational achievement and powers of speech and persuasion as a part of what he's known for. In 2012, Robert Sobukwe Street in Pretoria, formerly known as Esalen Street, was renamed after him in commemoration of his contribution to the black liberation struggle. Similarly, in 2013, Robert Sobukwe Road in Cape Town, formerly known as Moderdam Road, was renamed after him. Central Block at the University of Witwatersrand was renamed to Robert Sobukwe's block in 2016 following major support among students and alumni. Sobukwe's strong convictions and active resistance inspired many individuals and other organizations involved in the anti-apartheid movement, and notably the Black Consciousness Movement. I'm so glad because I did one for Steve Biko. I am so glad that Steve Biko was inspired by him, even though they were not in the ANC together. So there was no record of his voice. I remember researching, I was like, I didn't hear this man speak, but there's I see his face around, other African legends. That's what I call them. But I've never heard Sobukwe speak. And it makes sense. They never wanted his wisdom to go out in the streets. So there's no record of his voice. So his voice doesn't exist in history. Only his wife can remember, or his children, or his neighbor. That's so sad. That is so sad. Imagine if a movie would be made about this man. You don't know what he sounds like. I know Mandela's voice. I know Zuma's voice. I know Thabo Mbeki's voice. I know, other people's voices, but that's so sad. Okay, anyways, he was silenced. He was a lecturer at Wits and always a gardener, and he was always speaking to the gardeners and cleaners, which I think that's very noble and humbling. I mean, just so human of him. that he didn't think that highly, that he was above anyone else. Yeah, like what? What do you guys think? Like his voice, ugh. Like when the Bible said it is not good for man to be alone, I agree. It is not good for man to be alone. But anyways, I love you guys. Subscribe and share. What do you think about this legend? Oh, Robert Sobukwe. Yep. Yeah.